for coming along to today's standards meeting. Obviously, it's nice to see everybody again. Preferably, we'd like to see each other in the same room, but we need to be as safe and sound as possible. So it is lovely to see you all, and I thank you very much for giving of your time in relation to this particular meeting. There are a couple of things before we start that I would seek your indulgence on as members of the committee. I would, if it is and pleases yourselves, like to do two things. One, I would like to hold a moment of reflection and silence in relation to the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh. I would have done that last week. I think it's appropriate to do it this week. But in addition to that, I think we should also take that time to reflect on all those other people who have lost friends, loved ones across this previous 12 months in a very difficult situation. So I'll call upon that later on if you're all happy. And the second thing I'd like to do, which isn't on the agenda, and again, it is up to yourselves as a committee, I would like this committee to express its thanks and gratitude to all the people who have worked so hard in the past 12 months, be they people who work for the local authority or members like yourselves who have done such a sterling job in that time. So if you could quickly give me your assent to do those things, and then we can bring them in at the start of the meeting, and then we'll set away properly thereafter. Are we happy?
Agree.
If then I could ask for just a moment's silence and contemplation in relation to the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh. As I say, I think we should also take that time to reflect upon those friends and loved ones and those people within our communities who have sadly also suffered such a loss. And if we could start that now. Thank you, members. That's greatly appreciated. And in relation to the second request that I've made, I would like this committee to express its thanks and gratitude to all the members of the council who have continued to engage in their activities in the community and seek to serve in the best way they could. Included in that will be members of staff of the local authority, but also any members of staff or any people who have been working with the public and within our communities, be that in the health service, be that by volunteering. I would just like to express the gratitude of this particular committee to all of those people, and I hope that you would endorse that as a committee.
Agreed.
Thank you, members. If I can pass on to the full agenda, and as I say, it is wonderful to see you all again. But Leslie, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chairman, apologies from Councillors Armstrong and Rickaby.
Thank you. So what I need to warn you of, obviously, is that you will all be aware, because you'll all be involved in other Zoom meetings, that this is recorded. It is on YouTube and is live. The only people who can participate in the meeting formally are yourselves and the officers involved. However, members of the public and the press can make comments. So I think, obviously, you will all be on your best behaviour in that respect. In line with what we would normally try and do, obviously, if you would indicate in a normal fashion by the raising of a hand, or if you're very clever with Zoom, you can actually push a button that waves a hand. If you could indicate, Leslie's going to help me out with that because I can only see 9 screens, including myself. So if you indicate if you wish to involve or ask a question, and then we can ensure that you get your voices heard. I have not received, and I don't think Leslie's received, any additional items in relation to disclosures of interest, all of which should have been submitted by yourselves, and all of which I believe you have in hand already. Unless anybody wants to declare anything now, I will assume that that is the case. Susan? Councillor Dungworth?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a query really, and that is if somebody has made a complaint to standards or has a complaint made against them, is that an interest even though there is nothing about any details or any identification in this?
Neil?
Yes, I can answer that. I think every effort was made to anonymise the list of complaints, councillor. So there shouldn't be a problem with that. Anyone won't have to declare any interests in such circumstances. I mean, when I get onto that report, I'll make it quite clear that we're not to be discussing any details of any of those complaints in any event. Okay, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Councillor. If we could then move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated, and you will have had an opportunity to go through those minutes. I would simply ask at this stage, are we happy that they reflect a true record of the previous meeting? And if you can show by hand your agreement, I'll be obliged. Obviously, Councillor Flux, if you can assent by unmuting and telling us yes or no.
Chair, I wasn't actually at that meeting, so I couldn't confirm.
Thank you very much. I take it that was...
Chair?
Sorry.
Did you catch that? I wasn't actually at that meeting, so I couldn't confirm one way or another.
Yes, Councillor Flux, I'm sorry. I should have responded, but thank you for that. So, having agreed that the minutes are a true record, does any member have any matters arising in relation to those minutes? I'll assume assent. Thank you. If we could then move on to the 4th item, which is something that we seem to have been dealing with for several meetings, if not several years, is in relation to the Model Code of Conduct. I know that Helen has been doing a fair degree of work in relation to that, and I believe that Helen will be talking to this report. Neil, is that correct? That being the case, if I could just pass on to Helen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak on this item. Yes, Chair, just to confirm that hopefully the report is self-explanatory, and as you say, you've had previous reports on this matter, and I wouldn't really propose to expand much upon what is already within the report before you. So just to confirm, the recommendations are simply that members note the model code that's been issued, and that any comments made by members will be noted with a view to a further report being presented to members when officers have had the opportunity to consider the national and local picture further. So really, it's more a report for information today. But just by way of summary, as members are aware, following recommendations from the report of the Committee for Standards in Public Life on Ethical Standards in Local Government, which was published back on the 30th of January 2019, the LGA produced a model code of conduct, which was published on the 23rd of December 2020. So councils are now invited to consider whether to adapt the model code of conduct, which has been produced by the LGA. And as you're aware, a copy of that model code is produced at the back of the report. I apologise if there's any formatting errors, but it was copied from a PDF and it was quite tricky to do. But hopefully it should make sense. So yes, Chair, under the Localism Act, councils must adopt a code of conduct, and this must be consistent with the 7 principles of public life, of selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. And members may recall that the previous report on this matter indicated that it was hoped that the local authorities in the North East would work collaboratively, as has previously happened. And as I've said, we are liaising with colleagues in neighbouring authorities in this regard. So nationally, and interestingly, there has been a mixed response. As I've said in the report, in a recent survey of monitoring officers, the following responses were provided from 82 responses that were given. So 20% of the responders had adopted the code in full, 20% will adopt it in part, 55% will not adopt the code, of which 25% won't be adopting at all, 30% are looking to make changes independent of the new code, and 5% were undecided. Obviously, the picture might have changed a little bit since then, but it was, as I understand it, a fairly recent consultation. So members will see, in effect, the main change is that the new code includes a little bit more narrative in relation to each obligation contained within the code and guidance upon each provision. And I've provided a summary of that within the report. And I don't know if members have had the opportunity to consider the new code in comparison to the County Council's existing code. And that is in fact something which we could certainly bring back to the next standards committee. But you'll see effectively that the new code is really more wordy than the existing code. And as I say, it does provide additional guidance on each obligation. It does, for example, give examples of what might amount to treating others with respect, and how to deal with disrespectful behaviour from others. And within the new code, there are, for example, definitions of bullying and harassment, which are included, whereas previously, obviously, there weren't. And there's an express requirement now to promote equalities and not to discriminate unlawfully. So as I say, the full code is in the back of the report, and hopefully members have had the opportunity to consider that. I think the other important thing to say is that, as with the current code, there is no provision for sanctions written within the new code. Members will recall that the report of the Committee for Standards in Public Life concluded that the current sanctions available to local authorities are insufficient, and that the current lack of robust sanctions damages public confidence in the standards system and leaves local authorities with no means of enforcing lower level sanctions, nor of addressing serious or repeated misconduct. And they recommended that local authorities should therefore be given the power to suspend councillors without allowances for up to 6 months, and councillors would have the right to appeal to the local government ombudsman if that was the case. However, as previously, to make this change would require legislative change, and the government is as yet to respond to the 2019 report from the Committee in Public Life, Standards in Public Life, but it has recognised that its response is overdue. With regard to the regional picture, I understand that, for example, Durham County Council were going to consider whether to adopt the code in whole or in part, I understand, however, that they had previously made some changes to their code in any event. And Newcastle City Council has its standards committee tomorrow, as I understand it, and they will be asking members to consider the new code. Also bearing in mind, however, that the government is yet to respond to the Committee for Standards in Public Lives report, but I understand there has been an indication that that may be soon. So hopefully that all makes sense, Chair. I suppose it's over to members really. As I say, the recommendation within the report was that members note the model code, and any comments that members wish to make will be noted with a view to a further report being presented to this committee once we've had the opportunity to consider the local and national picture further. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Helen. Any members wishing to question or comment? Andrew.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Helen, for that detailed summary. A number of points, Chair. Normally, I probably would have just gone along and said, yeah, let's wait until the next meeting. But this is my last meeting, so my opportunity to say what I'm going to say is now and gone, right? I think there are a number of points we need to take into account. First of all, in relation to the report, on page 20, it refers to the item in relation to harassment. Now, I've just attended an equality and diversity training course run by a prominent local firm of solicitors, and they made it very clear that under the Equal Opportunities Act of 2010, harassment can be a single action. Now, the report says it's 2 or more. Now, I've checked that and clarified, and whilst it would be normal for there to be more than one incident, it is possible to consider a harassment claim if there is only one incident. And I think our code of conduct should reflect that, even if the model code of conduct doesn't. So that's the particular point. I want to express my disappointment that there are no timescales. I recognise timescales for an investigation. I recognise timescales could be used by the person who is the subject of the complaint to deliberately delay things. So I don't think I would be looking for timescales there, but I would be looking for timescales for the investigation, if at all possible, because I think we've experienced over the 11 years I've been involved in standards that they can be very, very protracted, and by the time you get round to actually dealing with them, they're so far long forgotten that it's almost irrelevant. So those two thoughts about the actual code. As I understand it, we still operate in Northumberland under 2 codes. There's the Principal Authority and a number of the parish and town councils who have adopted the Northumberland County Council Code. There are a lot of others that have adopted the NAUC Code of Conduct, which is almost the same, but there are 1 or 2 differences. And I think before we even considered adopting a new code or a revised code, there should be detailed discussions with NAUC and the parish and town councils to see if we can get at least 1 code in Northumberland that the new standards committee can then consider any complaints against. So my overall comments are, I think this is premature. I think I welcome the fact that Helen and Neil are talking to our colleagues in the region. I think it would be ideal if we could have 1 regional code of conduct, or at least the basis of a regional code of conduct, even if there have to be tweaks to cover local circumstances. So with that, Chair, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Councillor Tevitt. Helen or Neil, would you like to come back and comment to Councillor Tevitt, or are you happy just to accept the comments and we'll build them into our discussions in the future?
I was just going to make a point on Councillor Tebbett's first point, really. Probably the problem with having two solicitors here, I don't know what Helen's going to say. So Helen, I mean, if you're happy with me just covering that point. Yeah, I mean, all I was going to say, the protection, I think I can explain maybe the confusion around protection of, protection from harassment. The 1997 Act, I mean, from what I remember from my criminal litigation background, I think that's in the legislation that for that particular offence, there has to be 2 instances. But I think what you've been told, Councillor Tebbit, is entirely correct if it comes under the Equality Act. You know, for the purposes of a code of conduct, you know, harassment, you know, one instance of harassment doesn't have to fit within the 1997 Act. It can be classed as harassment, probably under the Equality Act, for the purposes of a code of conduct complaint. So, a fancy way of saying both apply, really. I think I hope that helps. That's all I wanted to say.
It certainly gives food for thought, and it's something we will have to build into our future discussions.
Yeah.
Do any of the members have comment or question?
If as long as our guidance can make it clear that it could be, it can be either, because if it, depending what the nature of the complaint is, if it's one of the protected characteristics under the Act, it's different, obviously, than the 1997 Act. And what we wouldn't want is somebody trying to escape from appropriate criticism because they say, oh, well, it was only one, and it doesn't qualify. And I think we just, as long as we're very clear in our guidance that isn't an excuse.
Well, you know, we'll note that, Chair, and I mean that might be food for thought to actually, you know, if we're proposed at a future time to adopt the new model code, for a slight amendment there, just to clarify that point.
I'd be happy with that.
Thank you. Any other members with a question or comment? Yeah.
Councillor Swinburne and Dunworth.
Sorry? Councillor
Swinburne and Councillor Dunworth would like to speak.
Brilliant. If we start with Councillor Swinburne, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a few things I'd just like to pick up on, one of which is it's a bit of a concern to see that 55% have decided not to adopt the model code. And I'm not sure whether that is because these authorities already have something in place which is maybe a bit more stringent. And I would like to hope that that is the case, and not because they have a lesser degree of a code, because that would be quite worrying. And I know we don't have the detail within this report. I'm not sure whether it's available, but to say, you know, 25% will not adopt the code, 30% not adopt it in full. But to think that, you know, I know it's my personal opinion, I think this is a very good basis to then take forward, and there should not be anything of a lesser degree than what has been you know, provided here, which leads me on to you know, some of the detail which is within here, and to see, you know, number 1, respect. We have 1.2, treat local authority employees, employees and representatives, partner organisations, volunteers, etc., with respect, and respect the role they play. I think is very good to see in work, you know, in there, and a bit more of a descriptor in there, because, you know, there have been issues around that, so that needs to be a very basic minimum. On page 20, as Councillor Tebbit has said, you know, bullying, harassment, discrimination, etc. There's more detail in there. And then we move on to 5.1. I do not bring my role or local authority into disrepute. And there's, you know, more information in there. All of these, you know, very good basics. What I would like to see, Councillor Tebbit touched on it before, is this to go forward into a great deal of uniformity across Northumberland, so that if we have to refer to something for a standards issue, there is one set of rules, and it's not, oh, well, we have these rules, but on this occasion we're going to use these rules, because we also have these that we can look at. Or well, there's the law as well, and on this occasion we'll fall back to the law, because we decided we're going to use these ones on this occasion. These will be the rules that we're going to use within Northumberland, and it is one set of rules. I'm interested, as others, to see what the legislation will come out, and what the decision on that, and what changes may come from that, with regards to any penalties or etc. So I'm not saying that this is premature. I think it's a good discussion point, and we can take this forward. But I would really like to see nothing less than what is in here. But I completely agree that we need uniformity, and you know, not a number of sets of different rules within Northumberland. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dungworth.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I suspect, and I don't know, I haven't spoken to any other local authorities about it, but I suspect some of the people are not adopting it because it doesn't go far enough. And maybe I'm being, you know, over generous to them, but if I have a frustration, it is that this still doesn't go far enough. There are no proper sanctions, so people can continue to behave in whichever way they want, because really there's no consequence of that. And until there is, I think with some people it's going to be difficult to get that real change. Like Councillor Swinburne, I welcome the facts that it is much clearer in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I think the issue that's been raised around equalities, and the Equalities Act is a really valid one. And we have had experience of people picking and choosing which act or which law or which bits of our constitution they will adhere to at different times. And I think we need to have a code that absolutely represents the Equality Act, and it isn't one or the other. So if I had anything really that I would want to change, it's that we take the most stringent of measures, and if that's the Equalities Act, then that's the one that needs to set the bar, rather than something that's a bit more wishy-washy. I don't know if we've had any. Somebody mentioned something about, you know, regional code. I do think it is worth talking to neighbours, and I know that our legal team do that. But just because, you know, these issues, I like to think, are not particular to Northumberland. I think we've had a bit of a torrid time around some of those things, but that isn't to say it you know, it couldn't happen in one of our neighbouring authorities. So if we could get some consistency regionally as well as within the county, I think that would be helpful. But it is very frustrating, A, how long this is taking, B, that we're getting no response back from government on something as important as this, and C, when we do involve in consultation, we don't appear to be being listened to, such as the sanctions, for instance.
Thank you, Councillor. I can only wholeheartedly agree with your views in relation to the length of time and the difficulties that the government are laying before us in terms of trying to get something in place which is worthwhile. Again, you who have contributed have identified that issue of consistency, that consistency within Northumberland or regionally, and it's extremely important. The other element I would say is, if we have consistency, it will make what's going to be quite difficult for Northumberland, that element of training and distribution of information relating to the code, considerably easier if we're all working from the same particular code. So thank you for that. Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just following up the other part of what Councillor Tebbit raised, and that's speaking to the town and parish councils. Tomorrow I'll be chairing a formal county committee of NALC, and I'm pretty sure that the chief officer will be watching this on YouTube as well. If it'll help speed things up, because this has dragged on for quite a long time, we can feed those comments from that county committee direct into Helen and Neil, through Stephen Rickett, and that perhaps will speed things up rather than you try and get to touch with 160 separate parish and town councils.
I thank you very much for that offer, Councillor Wallace. I'm sure both Helen and Neil will happily accept that opportunity. I can't speak for them, but I'm sure it would be sensible and worth their while to do so. So thank you for that option. Is there anybody else I cannot see? Oh, sorry, Councillor Swinburne again.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just come back on something. It was something that Councillor Dungworth mentioned with regards to the other authorities in the North East and being on audit and standards of the North of Tyne, and also combined authority joint transport. This report has been mentioned with regards to those standards, and the response there was, well, we adopt those standards which are made in the separate authorities. If we don't have a standardization across all of the 7 authorities, we're going to run into issues where members could be adherent to their own individual authority standards, but as a combined authority, those could differ from one to the next. So if an issue arises, they could be adherent to their own individual standards, but that's different to their neighbours' standards. And in a combined authority environment, we could then have issues. Well, mine's fine where I am, but in a meeting situation, it's not the same as the person, for want of a better term, that they're sat beside, because that would breach their standards. So I think it really is important that across 7 authorities, we look to normalise and have agreement that these are acceptable standards across all 7, at least all 7 North East authorities, so that there is agreement across the whole of the region. And yes, it's discussions that officers need to take forward, but there are great strides ahead with having that normalisation there.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that Neil and Helen will have taken that on board, and certainly that's minuted. And those discussions that Neil and Helen will take up with their counterparts throughout the area will address, or certainly look at, those areas of consistency, because all the speakers so far have indicated that to do this properly and to do it correctly, it does need that level of consistency, be it within the county or be it across the region. And I'm sure that Neil and Helen build that into their conversations. Do we have any further comment or question? I do have a question, whether it's appropriate or not. When we've been in our discussions, one of the areas that this committee in particular have had substantial concerns about has been social media. And I'm just wondering, in all the other discussions, is there any particular line that's being considered by the various local authorities and standards committees across the region? I'll ask that with Neil and Helen.
Thank you, Chair. It's certainly something that that we can raise with the neighbouring authorities and see what they have done in relation to that. I suppose the general principles within the code would obviously apply within social media as well. Members' dealings within social media. I'm sure I did see a reference to social media within this, but I may be wrong on that. But we can certainly raise that with colleagues in neighbouring authorities as well.
Thank you.
Just to chip in, Chair, as well, I did notice, I think in a discussion on a national level, it was noted as a potential weakness of the new code that it didn't cover social media. And as Helen says, the principles apply to all circumstances in any event. But it's worth noting that our current code of conduct doesn't cover social media either. So, if that's a concern of members, then we can certainly take that on board and consider whether there needs to be, whether we can propose at a future date that there's a section on that.
Thank you. If members sorry, Councillor Tebbit.
It was just a comment. Didn't we publish an advisory note on social media about 3-4 years ago? which presumably is somewhere in all the files. So it wasn't part of the code, but it was an advisory note on how members should deal with social media. We actually discussed not adopting it as part of the code, but issuing it as an advisory note. So that should be around.
Yeah, I believe that you're correct, Councillor Tebbit. However, I think the discussion moved on from there when the opportunity presented itself in this consultation process to firm up and enshrine the issues in relation to social media within the confines of the Code of Conduct, so that it was actually more formally recognised and was something that was more substantive in terms of dealing with it. But yes, I totally agree with you, Councillor Tebbit. We did issue an advisory at one stage. Any other members, questions or comments in relation to the item? If not, thank you very much, Helen. Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you, members. If I could ask Neil to then move on to the complaints register, please, and the progress report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If you just give me a minute, I'm just going to get the document up on my screen. Yes, Chair. This is obviously, Chair, just a report for information that we bring to Standards Committee. As I mentioned earlier, every effort has been made to anonymise the list of complaints. There should be no details in there, but really, you know, it gives the committee a flavour of the volume of complaints that we've been dealing with, and how many have been dealt with and how many are outstanding. Looking at the register, really ask members to concentrate on the complaints from. You'll see in the reference there from 1/20. They're the 2020 complaints onwards, and there's towards the end there all of the 2021 complaints are listed. Earlier complaints are listed. They've been reported before. I think really just for context. Maybe I shouldn't have included them, but they're there for context anyway. I think it obviously shows that in the previous year, 2020, there was a significant increase in the number of complaints. Just to clarify one or two matters, Chair, it's quite dry reading in terms of the comments at the end. It just gives very basic information whether they are pending investigation or towards the end there, some of the more recent matters, it says pending to meet with the independent person for review. Just to clarify that, we're not waiting on the independent person to respond in any way on those. The independent person has provided their initial assessment, but I just need to arrange a meeting with her after this meeting, really, to discuss how, you know, what the next steps are on a number of complaints. So there it is, Chair. I'm happy to take questions, obviously on a very general nature, if members wish to be informed of anything, but it is just there to note. Okay, thank you.
I'll hand that over to members. If any member would like to question or comment in relation to Neil's report, happy to take it.
Councillor Dungworth.
Councillor Dungworth. Really? I didn't see a hand.
Chair. Yeah, my hand's raised.
Sorry.
It's the electronic hand. Yeah, I'm absolutely horrified by this report. It is no surprise because we know what's been going on since summer 2020 in Northumberland, but actually to see it in black and white, I think in itself, and obviously this isn't the meeting to do it, but at some point, I think Standards needs to have a full report on what has happened this year in this county and why we've seen this increased level of complaints. And I know that there's a variety who I suspect, well, you know, I know there's a variety of member complaints against officers, officer complaints against members, and members against members. I suspect in there that there is no complaints by members of the general public. It is the internal politics of the council being played out through the standards process, which I feel is totally inappropriate. That is not what standards is for. But I think the other thing that does concern me is how many of these are outstanding. And this isn't a criticism of the individual officers. This is not a criticism of our legal department. It's a consequence of a ridiculous number of complaints being made. But I do think it is really important that these are dealt with. And I've raised this in other forums. I am extremely concerned that this level of complaints is going forward into a new council in 2 weeks' time, and we are handing a poisonous legacy over. And we really need to find the resources somewhere to better support this system to get this backlog cleared up. So that we can start again, really. So I think that there are probably more comments, but they are comments that I want noted, because this is the result of a council being, or councillors being, more interested internally and with internal battles than actually doing the job of the council, which should be outward facing. And I am deeply saddened that it's a legacy that we're handing over. This is not what I want to see, what I've ever seen from any council I've been involved in Northumberland. And I sincerely hope we get the resources in to get this lot dealt with, and support this service and support members going forward in the new council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dungworth.
Chair.
Would you care to come back?
Yeah, just a point of clarification, really, if it assists members. Just on the point of who's making complaints, obviously, can't give any details, but on the register, the fourth column does give information as to whether the complaint relates to a town or parish councillor or a county council councillor, and complaints come from a, all I can say really is that complaints come from a number of sources. I can't really go any further than that. And that's just to provide a little additional information, Chair.
Councillor Tebbit, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, apologies.
Sorry, can I just come back in on that? Because I think it would be useful, sorry, just in terms of clarity, to have that breakdown. And again, it doesn't need to identify, so it can talk about of those numbers. So, I count, there are 24 outstanding cases, 24 unresolved cases, some of them, well, majority of them going back into last year. So it could be just in terms of numbers, how many are officer, how many are member, how many are raised by members of the public. Because again, there is something about value for money and what this council is spending its money on as well in there. So I don't think that would breach any confidentiality for us to have that information.
I'll take that away and consider it, Chair, I think.
Thank you.
Some thought.
Well, after Andrew has had his say, I'll come back on that. Andrew.
Yeah, I wanted to support what Councillor Dungworth was saying in relation to some concern. Now, I have no idea what the complaints are. What does concern me is two things: that if any of the open complaints need actually a standards hearing, we are really running into all sorts of difficulties. Not only, as Susan points out, we have a new committee, a new council and a new committee in 2 or 3 weeks' time. You've also got to get parish representatives to deal with the ones where there are parish councillors involved. And the last time the county council appointed its parish representatives, of which Alex and I are 2 of those 3, it took it nearly a year to do, which means there could be a further delay of a year. And as I understand it, that parish representatives cannot be dual-hatted. They have to be only parish or town councillors. Now, none of us can carry forward. I can't anyway, because I'm not standing again. But the process is going to take ages. Really very worrying. And the other bit that worries me, I'm a bit like Susan, I did some totting up. There are 9 awaiting a review from the independent person. Now, I have never ever in the 9 years since we had an independent person ever seen a report where we've been saying we're awaiting a review with the independent person. We have a new independent person. She's not here today. I have no idea how she's functioning. But what is happening if we've got 9 cases which are awaiting her consideration? That is unprecedented. So a lot of questions there.
Yeah,
Chair, just on that last point, I did mention before, I hope to clarify, but in terms of that entry in the register, please don't take it as meaning that the independent person is sitting there not fulfilling functions. Far from it. What has actually happened there is that I've sent really quite an amount of matters to her in a short space of time. She's responded on all of them with her initial assessment, and maybe it's my terminology. It's really just for me to go back and have a discussion about next steps. You know, a bit of a joint effort on how we're going to progress certain matters, and that's on me, and that's something I'm going to be doing straight after this committee.
Thanks.
Hope that clarifies, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Tabbert. I mean, to be fair, Neil and Helen, it may be worthwhile if you see it appropriate, given the nature of the discussion we've had, that I'm happy as chair to work alongside yourselves to see if we can look at a means and look through what's occurring to see whether or not we can change that dynamic and change that dimension. It may well be that there are practical reasons that we can't, but I am happy to go through these with you and see if we can find a course of action that may resolve some of the issues. It may not, there's no guarantee, but I think if we can get our heads together, perhaps we can start looking at mechanisms that may well fulfill some of the concerns that have been raised by members today.
Well, thank you for that, Chair. Certainly in terms of process and mechanisms, you know, you're always mindful that matters can be improved. It doesn't alter the fundamental function of the independent person and ourselves, of course, but I'll take those comments on board and give them some thought.
Anybody wishing to add or question? No. Thank you very much, Neil, for the report. Thank you very much, members, for your constructive comments. I think it's useful to get those pieces of information aired and the concerns raised, so we can look to try and address them more fully. That being the case, we are now down to the part of the meeting where we have any other urgent business. I have not had anything submitted to myself. Leslie, Neil, have you had anything submitted to you as matters of urgent business?
No, Chair.
No, Chair.
Is there a member who would like to raise a matter of urgent pertinent business? No. In which case, can I thank you all once again for giving up of your time. I realise that you're all extremely busy people and you're looking to serve your communities fully. And in being part of this committee, you are doing that to the nth degree. So again, thank you for all your efforts and all your time. Thank you to the officers for your support. And I will close the meeting. The next meeting will be Thursday, July the 15th at 2 p.m. I suspect venue to be determined. at this stage, Leslie?
Yes, I don't know what form the meeting will take at the moment.
Yeah. And the other thing, Leslie, in practical terms, if you could leave a copy of the blank minutes at the counter, because I'm now apparently physically able to leave my home, so I can come across the county and sign off at the desk if necessary.
Okay.
So if you're happy doing that, just send me an email to let me know on that.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time.
Chair, you obviously can't see the raised hands, the electronic
Sorry.
hands. It's all right.
Yours guns against your light switch, so I did.
I just want, first of all, I wanted to thank you for chairing these meetings so well. I've only for the last 2 years, I think, been a member of this committee, so thank you for that. But just, I'm aware there is a meeting date set for July. None of us know if we're going to be at that meeting, but I am aware that we haven't met this committee hasn't met as regularly as maybe it should have done, particularly looking at the volume of work that's going through standards at the moment. So could I suggest that as chair, you make sure that the meetings aren't cancelled or deferred, and that this is held in its regular diary slot, if not more often, to get these matters dealt with and out of the way, because it is quite some time. Well, we haven't, I think we've only met virtually once, so that's a year, and all this has been going on in the background. So I would have suggested that we maybe should have been meeting during that time rather than right at the end, and I suspect that this meeting wouldn't even have happened before the elections, had not a number of councillors said that it needed to happen before the elections when it was cancelled last week because of the death of Prince Philip. So please carry on using your authority as the independent chair of standards to make sure that these things happen.
I will take that comment on board. Thank you very much for that. Right, well, thank you very much, and we shall see you anon. We'll certainly see you on the 15th of July. And as I say, thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers.